Great. Here we are again for episode 4.
Yep, absolutely. We're here.
Yeah. So Vernon, you had there's been some stuff going on this week that you were going to mention.
It's so. Do you know the Ron Paul meme? It's happening. That kind of Ron Paul going kind of like this, and like it's happening.
Right. Okay. Yes.
Yeah,
I'm not great on pop culture actually, so I actually probably
okay.
missed it.
Right. Yeah. Well,
Uh,
it felt like an it's happening moment because for us on the men's rights and activist side, because circumcision was trending on Twitter this week.
mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And biggest coincidence, because I just got done posting my AVFM article on Matt Walsh's screw up, right, on the subject. So for context, for the listeners, Matt Walsh loves to grandstand about child mutilations when the trans surgeries are happening and
Yes.
such, right? But he's there's a mutual follower on Twitter, Nikos anti-MGM. That's the username. He shared me a photo of Matt Walsh, basically making light of those that complain about infant male genital mutilation, which euphemistically is called circumcision, right?
Yeah.
And well, read the article. I really rip him quite a bit for that one. But the same day as I posted it, obviously I didn't cause this flurry, right? It's fun to think that I did, but no, it was coincidental. Circumcision started trending, and I guess the thing that I don't know who came first, but Ben Shapiro. I'm going to try and find the thing the tweet right now because it's been kind of far down since, but basically just saying that it's stupid to compare organ removals and such to removing a flap of skin of something to that effect. So while I look for the tweet, why don't we debunk the flap of skin argument?
Yes, I was going to say, yeah, you posted that on one of our internal groups earlier in the week, actually. So I did see that tweet, even though I don't spend much time on Twitter in general.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, I mean, it's really quite ridiculous to make a claim like that. I mean, I think at this point, there's pretty much overwhelming evidence. There's a lot of research that's been done into the foreskin, the number of nerves in there that we know now. Number of nerves is kind of interesting because you do hear people say 20,000. Okay. Now, the number, from what I understand from the research, has been between 10 and 20,000. So that's the number that's generally found. But so a large number of nerves. Obviously, there's plenty of eyewitness accounts of the effects when little boys have the foreskin removed without anesthetic, and the effect of that, obviously, and the cortisol goes through the brain. They found actually months later. They found high elevated cortisol levels months after the procedure. The idea that it's some sort of flap of skin that I don't know. I mean, what would even be sort of be an equivalent to try to claim somewhere else on the body, but it's just ridiculous. I mean, it's obviously it's performing a function, many important functions there. It's interesting. I mean, it's primarily American culture where we do see this. We don't have it so much here in Australia and the UK. It's even less. But in American culture, they really are dismissive of it. It's absolutely extraordinary.
Yeah, absolutely. I found it. This is a response to Andrew Sullivan's tweet, which Andrew Sullivan is the sensible one, right? He's saying that are basically saying something along the lines of. Those of you complaining about the transgender surgeries, are they willing to talk about, when it's done to infant boys, something along those lines? Very, very sensible comment, especially coming from somebody of his stature and popularity, I think. So this was Ben Shapiro's response to it. So your suggestion is that the removal of the foreskin is equivalent to the removal of the penis and testicles, formation of a false body cavity, and the hormonal replacement with opposite sex hormones. That is perhaps the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Well, that is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Yeah, so that's what he said.
Yeah, And it's interesting. We do see this article. We do see this idea circulated quite a bit, even when comparing. Proponents of circumcision will talk about comparing MGM, male genital mutilation, FGM, female genital mutilation, and say that FGM is always much more severe. Now we know that that actually isn't the case, and we can provide data to show that MGM is in fact more severe than many forms of FGM. But to my mind, it isn't really about a comparison, in all honesty, about the severity of it. It's about bodily autonomy. That's the way I look at it. So I think while we do see that, that it is more severe than they're often arguing, that's not really the core argument in my view. I think it's just about bodily autonomy. We shouldn't be we shouldn't be removing healthy tissue from children.
Right.
They can't consent, and it just shouldn't be done. It's irrespective of how damaging it is.
Exactly, and I don't catch anti-activists actually bothering with the comparison so much. They do when they're pressed, but generally it's not our talking point.
Exactly, that's right. And I think that's right. Most anti-activists have realized that. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. Now let me find a follow-up on the subject, since the subject was trending. Now we had freaking Brett Weinstein.
Now, do you want to give everyone just a bit of context, a quick rundown on who Brett Weinstein is?
All right. So based on my understanding, I haven't followed him terribly compared to, say, like Jordan Peterson, perhaps. But I think he was ran out of his university. I think it was Evergreen. Is that right?
Evergreen College.
That's right. Evergreen College.
That's right.
And I'm trying to remember what the exact context of that was. It was was it something to do with teaching some things about race, or was it about?
Well, sort of. So, sorry to put you on the spot there too, actually.
No, that's okay.
No. So Brett Weinstein was a lecturer. Brett Weinstein and his wife were both lecturers at Evergreen College in the United States. Now, Evergreen has a bit of a reputation for being a left-wing college, going quite a way back, actually, I think. Not that I try to talk about left and right too much, but I think in this case, it's almost unavoidable. Now, once a year at Evergreen College, black students would vacate the college and have a day off. So the classes would continue, but they would vacate, and this was a form of protest. And this is something that had been going on at Evergreen for quite a long time. And a few years ago, I think it may have been 2016 or thereabouts, maybe 2018. Anyway, the 1 year, they essentially collectively, the black student body, said that rather than us leaving college, the white students should leave college while we stay. Now, here we have a comparison. On the one hand, we have a group of people who are voluntarily leaving, and it is a form of protest, personal expression, and that's their choice. On the other, they are insisting that a different group of people not attend the university. So I think we have very different situations there. Well, Brett Weinstein himself, and he would admit this, he's very much on the left. I think he has said it actually publicly on a number of occasions.
Yes.
He objected to this and said that while the former, you got, a particular subset of the student body choosing to protest and leave, that's fine, that's personal choice. Telling other people to leave is objectionable. So anyway, it really blew up. It actually became at one point really, it was potentially dangerous for him and his wife to be on campus. I think they actually avoided the campus because of concerns for personal safety. There were riots for about 4 days at the campus.
Mm-hmm.
Now, things did eventually calm down. However, both he and his wife left and have got work elsewhere. And of course, he's a much more high profile individual than he was then.
Yeah.
But Evergreen College enrollments plummeted, something like 30 to 35% drop by the following year. And they just opened up a new big dormitory, and they had to mothball it because there weren't enough students to put into the new dormitory. And this is now sort of a few years later, and I believe that the enrollments still haven't recovered to their protest levels. So I think what we're seeing, despite the nature of the college and the people who would be inclined to go there, many of the parents were apparently really reluctant to send their kids there after what they saw.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah.
Right. So, you'd think that this is a sensible kind of guy, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's right. I was going to say he's certainly got positions he feels quite strongly about. He's on the left, but I think he's been, despite his own political bias, which he admits, I think he has been quite fair-minded in a lot of ways. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Right. So here's what he had to say. And this is not the first time he said something like this, by the way. But since circumcision was trending, this is what he said. Foreskin is an evolutionary adaptation. It had a value and may or may not be net beneficial to the modern environments. Circumcision is also an adaptation that may or may not be net beneficial in modern times. Surgical sex change is not an adaptation done in children. It's immoral.
So there's a lot there to unpack, isn't there? Okay, because I mean he's sort of pontificating a little bit about a few things. He's making, if you want to make an argument about foreskin, about evolutionary adaptation, for example, there's probably a lot to be said about that. And circumcision, that's an interesting argument to make. But if somebody's going to make an argument that circumcision is some sort of evolutionary adaptation, why couldn't transgenderism be an evolutionary adaptation as well? I don't think you could probably differentiate those two. Personally, I don't think either are, but I don't think you could say easily that one is and one isn't.
Right, yeah. And what about FGM? Isn't that an adaptation?
Exactly. That's exactly right. If FGM is, FGM probably is as well, actually. I mean, it's interesting. So MGM does slightly reduce HIV rates. Now, there are better ways of preventing HIV, but an NGO in Africa some years ago, I can't remember if I mentioned this in an episode, they were studying the comparison of FGM and HIV rates, and they thought they'd find that FGM increased HIV rates, and they actually found that FGM reduced HIV rates, and they absolutely flipped, because now they were left trying to explain why this was the case, right? And they said confounding factors, which they mean that by that something else is going on that makes these two things correlate. Well, if that's the case, that could be the case for MGM as well. Maybe that's the reason it slightly reduces HIV rates, because of confounding factors, but they don't say that. Only say when it's FGM. But anyway, yes, that's right.
Right. So I'm going to try and unpack this. What I've said was, this is a very different strategy to refuse to condemn MGM than the Matt Walshes and the Ben Shapiros, because this is trying to be middle ground and trying not to have a position. It's trying to be neutral, right? But that's not the same as actually being against it in any way. You know, it's not confronting the actual problems of the actual ripping of the foreskin.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah. So I call Brett Weinstein an absolute coward for this.
Yeah. I think that's right. It's interesting. He's kind of tried to appeal to science in a sense, but without any sort of basis. If you want to make an argument that one of these things is an evolutionary adaptation, then have a study and let's have a look at the data and see if it makes any sense. But he's just sort of made it up as he went along, from as far as I can tell.
That seems like the case. Like, I'm not trying to be I'm not trying to rag on the more religious side, but it seems like the whole evolutionary psychology thing is when science started to be cool for the more conservative types.
But to me, it just comes back to that argument about bodily autonomy again. It's just it's not okay to remove healthy tissue from an infant without their consent. And that's even true even if you're engaging in, if you're using anesthetics and so forth. And we know, certainly historically to some extent today, that it's still not done without anesthetics. So even aside from that, though, it's just not okay. That, to me, that's the bottom line. It's not okay to remove healthy tissue. Now, one argument that, if I guess I'll divert a little bit from the Twitter stream, but one argument that's often talked about along these lines is that parents make choices for children, right? But when it comes to operations and so forth and surgery, the choices that parents make are in relation to identified medical conditions, because the children are deemed not able to make the choice for themselves. But in the case of circumcision, even proponents of circumcision, informed proponents, will admit that it's not medically necessary. So therefore parental consent shouldn't come into it. That's an excuse they often use, that parents are allowed to make that choice. Right. But we're not talking about an identified condition here. We're talking about perfectly healthy tissue being removed.
Right.
So it shouldn't matter that the parents are consenting.
Exactly. This I kind of had this problem with the whole parents' choice thing on anything that doesn't have to do with actually taking care of the child. Now, sadly, this is the pretext that a lot of these MGMs actually happen, but a lot of the times it's just that's the way I like it, or that's the way the dad is. So So I think that is it's an entitlement on the upon the child by the parent. And I think that's wrong.
Yeah. And our intention ultimately is that male genital mutilation will be illegal alongside female genital mutilation. It won't be a case where parents can choose.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. Yeah. In the comments of Brett's tweet, there was he was responding to someone. I think, okay, here we go. Here it is. So he says, this is about circumcision again. It has nothing to do with preference. Circumcision has stood the test of evolutionary time. If it was simply negative, selection would have eliminated it. You look like in pain.
You could almost argue that it has. In all honesty, so only about 30% of men around the world are circumcised. I think particularly a lot of Americans don't know that. Circumcision essentially exists in the United States and the Middle East and parts of Africa. That's pretty much it. Yeah. So, and in actual fact, there are. If we look at a lot of, look at say the United States. I mean, the birth rate has fallen in the Western countries. But yeah, it's. I think that's quite a ridiculous argument to make, actually. Again, he's sort of appealing to science, isn't he? Sort of without any sort of basis for it. Probably not even citing any studies or anything. Just sort of making some claim that there must be some evolutionary advantage to doing this, which is really quite an extraordinary thing to say.
Yeah.
I mean, I was just going to say, we know that circumcision is tied to erectile dysfunction. And there's reasons for this. There's something called keratosis that occurs on the gland's penis when it's been exposed to the air for a long period of time, number of years, and that affects stimulation during sex, which I suspect is what's really going on with the erectile dysfunction. It's not that the penis isn't working properly in that sense, that it can't become erect. It's that the lack of stimulation because of the keratosis is causing a problem. So I suspect that's what's going on there. But that actually, I mean, will have an effect on the ability of men to impregnate women and so forth. So maybe the force, maybe circumcision is actually its evolution will work against it in time.
Oh yeah,
I hope so.
Right. Yeah, it's because adaptations. Sometimes we adapt to horrible things that are done to us, as a species, as individuals. So, we can't just explain away all these circumstances by which these adaptations keep on happening, right? We can actually admit that it's wrong to do so, and Brett is not. Yeah.
It's as I said, he hasn't. It's sort of he's tried to sort of play in the middle there a little bit and sort of bring science into it, but without any sort of basis, not even referencing any studies or anything like that, just sort of making it up as he goes along. Yes. So it's interesting. Now, as you will know, Vernon, Dr. John Kellogg helped popularize circumcision in the United States.
Right.
John Kellogg, and yes, he is the same Kellogg from Kellogg's Cornflakes. He and his brother developed Kellogg's Cornflakes originally. And this may seem, once I told this to someone once, and they sort of looked at me strangely and went, that's random. And but it's not actually, because John Kellogg was a believer that overstimulation was physically harmful. This was a widespread belief in the 19th century. And he was a major proponent of this idea. It still exists, by the way. I've actually met people who still believe this, that too much stimulation will actually harm you. So John Kellogg developed Kellogg's Cornflakes because he wanted to make a bland breakfast cereal. If you've ever thought Kellogg's Cornflakes were bland, they're actually designed to be that way. He and his brother spent years trialing different things until they came up with a particularly bland formula. So circumcision was deliberately intended, and John Kellogg has made this very clear. He wanted to harm male sexual experience because he felt it would be better for the men to do that. He set out to do it. So right from the beginning, he knew what he was doing. And this is because he believed this idea that being overstimulated was bad for you.
Right.
As I said, very popular in the 19th century. So I think circumcision certainly still existed and was probably even widespread before him, but he was a major proponent of it, and he really intended to harm men in this way. He thought it was good for them. By the way, he also was very much anti-male masturbation, right? Mm-hmm. And this was part of this as well. He was also anti-female masturbation. He also prescribed some pretty nasty stuff for little girls as well.
Yeah. He basically advocated mutilation of the girls too, right?
Yeah, basically. That's right, exactly. Yeah. And all sorts of sort of mild acids on the clitoris, all sorts of stuff. Yeah.
But that didn't catch on, you know?
No. Yeah, that's right. But he believed firmly in this. Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Right. Yeah. So I've actually looked at the Wikipedia page for John Harvey Kellogg. It claims that Kellogg's involvement was debunked. Can we respond to that?
That's interesting. So I'll check that out. I don't think that's the case. I believe he wrote a book on the topic. So,
I agree with you. You know, so you know, I think it's just another attempt to downplay the prevalence and serious impact of. He
wasn't the only one, and there were, and it was already around in American society. So I think possibly the claim that he alone did it, maybe that's what they're getting at, because some people have tried to argue that he alone did it, and that's not the case. But he was certainly a major proponent of it, and because he was quite a prominent figure, that I think his argument carried quite a lot of weight.
Right.
Yeah.
Let me see if I can try and find it too. Yeah. It was somewhere. I'm pretty sure I found it somewhere.
Yeah.
Okay, here it is. Go to masturbation prevention.
Okay. I also found a name of at least a pamphlet he wrote was called Plain Facts for Old and Young, in which he advocated circumcision.
Mm-hmm.
So it was,
right, yeah.
Yeah. Yes, go on.
Go to Views on Sexuality, Masturbation Prevention.
Okay. Masturbation. I guess a common myth in popular culture states that Kellogg was responsible for widespread prevalence of circumcision in the United States. And it's followed by a citation needed. So basically, it's a statement in Wikipedia which has no citation. This is not accurate, as Kellogg never promoted routine circumcision for all males in his writings. Rather only men who are chronically addicted to masturbation, which would have been a fairly high proportion of teenage boys probably. But anyway, yes, and it also goes on to say that his suggestions were not taken seriously by mainstream medical. I don't think that's true. There was
that is not true.
Yeah, there were a lot of people who were proponents of corrective measures for masturbation at the time. So in Western culture, so. Yes, no, I think it's pretty clear. As I said, in regards to his, anyway, that's probably something to look at actually, and probably put something on Wiki for Men countering that argument actually.
Exactly.
Yeah. But yes, it was his belief in the sort of plain living and the fact that overstimulation was harmful that drove a lot of his actions, I think. Yeah. Did I mention he was a medical doctor? I think I did. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right.
Yes, he was actually a medical doctor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You know, it's funny thinking back to the bland cereal argument, and then because we got the cornflakes, and then we had Frosted Flakes, which tried to flavor them. I know it's funny. I wonder if that's like a more of a shot at Kellogg than
Exactly. He'd be turning over in his grave, actually, wouldn't he? Good.
Yep. Yeah, and every time I ate cornflakes, I had a scoop of sugar on them. So yeah.
That's right. So people have spent the last 150 years trying to basically make them interesting again. That's right. So putting sugar and honey and whatnot on them.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. Yep. Yeah, but So yeah, that's the kind of stuff that was going on. And here's the great thing. Here's the it's happening moment. Everybody was catching on to this. Everybody was ripping these guys to shreds. You know, Bloodstained Man caught on to it. You know, see, you know, and one thing I saw was you know, I ripped Lauren Southern before for her kind of trashing the manosphere, but I never expected to see sanity from Lauren Southern of all people when Circumcision was trending. I actually saw something.
Okay.
Yeah. So she was retweeting Brett Weinstein, right? And she said, "Funny you should say this. When the first experiments on transgenderism were the result of botched circumcisions, David Raymer later shot himself."
Yes,
Yeah,
that's
this is
true.
Lauren Southern, to her credit.
Yes, that is a very good point. In fact, there are a number of areas. There's so much that we talk about. There are a number of areas that I wish I wish I'd spent more time on, and would like spend more time in the future. And the story of David Reimer is actually an example of that. So. David, who originally had another name, actually, was going. There was a botched circumcision operation. His penis was virtually completely sliced off. I understand from right, and then the doctors talked about what to do with how to address this, and the decision was made to gender reassign him as a female, and he was brought up as a girl until he was 14 when the truth was revealed to him. And he said something along the lines of, I always knew there was something that was wrong. And for the first time in my life, it all made sense. He realized that there had been something wrong all along. Something like something nobody was telling him, you know, and there really was. There was something that they weren't telling him. So he transitioned back but he still didn't have a penis, obviously, but he lived as a man and he ended up taking his own life. Now, there's actually a lot more to the story of David and his brother, actually, because there's a researcher by the name of Dr. John Monet, originally from New Zealand, who was in the United States. Monet was the primary proponent of arguing that he was a major proponent of arguing that gender was a social construct, which is something, of course, we see a lot of feminists, when you hear feminists talk about this stuff, it came from John Monet's work. The only problem is John Monet was engaging in academic fraud, where he was claiming that this gender transition by David had gone well. It was anything but. And there was lots of research, lots of evidence as David and his brother were growing up that there was a problem. Now, this was complicated by the fact, I don't know, sorry, Vernon, how much you've looked into this, but I've done a bit of research in the past, and it says something we need to look at more, talk about more. Anyway, Dr. John Monet, it was revealed by David and his brother, got, for some reason, and I'm really at a loss to understand where he was going with this and why he thought this was a good idea, he used to get the two kids to simulate sex acts.
Right.
Yeah. I can't imagine what sort of basis he thought this was anyway acceptable, and what he was hoping to get out of it. But he did, and both the brothers admitted this later. Said this later on. Anyway, both brothers ended up taking their own lives.
Right. Well, one thing I had to note is that this wasn't exactly a case of the actual routine infant circumcision that we had going on. I think it was like 6 months in for phimosis. I think it was. And I think
was it phimosis? Okay,
I think it was. Yeah,
I thought it had been routine infant circumcision, but I might be wrong. Yeah.
Okay. So you know, this is Wikipedia, so we don't know how much we can actually trust this, but Wikipedia says that at the age of 6 months, they were both boys were diagnosed with phimosis. That according to Wikipedia. And
you're right. That's
right,
true.
yeah.
Yes,
but
you're right.
Here's the thing. David, he was born Bruce, by the way. That's his original name. You know, he got the mutilation. You know, the actual cut. You know, hacked off that part of his penis and such. And because of that, the operation for his brother was postponed and put off indefinitely. His phimosis recovered naturally.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah. So it's double tragic. You know,
exactly.
It could have been, right. The whole thing could have been prevented.
Yeah, and as an aside, and getting back to circumcision again, one of the major reasons that circumcision is done is for phimosis, right? So for phimosis is a condition that occurs where the foreskin will not retract properly. Now, we now know that there are a variety of non-surgical treatments that are now, as we see from this, sometimes it corrects on its own, but also too, there are now a number of non-surgical treatments, and there are even surgical treatments less severe than circumcision, like one's called the dorsal slit method, where they take there was some research that found that about 95% of cases of phimosis, persistent phimosis, could be fixed with stretching exercises and hormonal creams. So what they're essentially doing is the boys would have to actually stretch the foreskin, and over a period of time, it would correct. But in the 5% of cases where that was not the case, and they deemed that surgery was necessary, methods like the dorsal slit method, where they would basically make a cut in the foreskin and it frees it up, so much less damaging than a circumcision, which is obviously is removal of the foreskin.
Right.
So yeah, so you have this sort of now a wider variety of corrective options to it. I want to mention something that a lot of people don't know about circumcision too. Circumcision has been found to phimosis, I should say. Phimosis has been found to correlate with, believe it or not, unusual masturbation techniques in young boys, in teenage boys. And it seems to me, if you put the pieces together, and I don't see anybody who's really sort of talking about this, but I think they probably should. It looks like masturbation is essentially stretching the foreskin, right? And so if the boys are doing it right, they avoid the phimosis, and they end up sort of essentially preparing the foreskin for a later having the sex life, right? But if they go and engage in certain forms of masturbation which are unusual, they don't stretch the foreskin, and phimosis ends up happening. So I think that what they're saying basically is the stretching exercises are correcting it. So it seems to me that probably nature is sort of doing this, and basically preparing them in for a later sex life. And when they've gone down the wrong track for whatever reason in this process, they end up with some of them end up with phimosis, and they have corrected it, as I said, with stretching and topical hormonal creams.
I see.
In a lot of cases. So I guess what I'm saying there is that nature has sort of evolved these strategies for us, if you like, and it's probably correcting a lot of problems without anyone ever having realized it. And now with these stretching techniques that they've developed, they're able to correct a lot of these problems without any surgery.
Right. And I want to comment in light of this on the idea of the male libido as kind of his life force, basically his kind of, it's a very, it's only, it's physically intact and they're spiritually intact too, because here's what I'm talking about. There's a lot of these cases of, it's no to happen. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, but anyway, we hear these stories of men getting their genitals kind of compromised in these ways, and and certainly in the case of, say, David Raymer, it led to suicide, right? It led to depression and suicide. It seems to me that the male genital is kind of a lot of where a man's lifted spirit kind of comes from. His kind of energy for and lust of life, I think. And once again, the compromise of it kind of leads to a slow death, actually. There's one thing I'm thinking about recently was the case of Alan Turing. He was a homosexual, but he was the developer he was a pioneer in computer science. He was is the guy that made the Enigma machine in World War II, I think. Yes. And because I think it was in Britain, homosexuality was criminal, I think.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. And he was basically given the choice to undergo chemical castration, basically, right? And that's it's kind of affected his body in a way that caused what's the word? Like a dysphoria, basically. And he felt like not a man so much, and eventually came to take his own life, I think. Yeah. So
he died of cyanide poisoning. I think they did rule it a suicide. It was never conclusively proven, but there's, I suppose, a pretty high chance it was. What happened was he was found dead with an apple, partially eaten apple, by his bedside, and the apple was contaminated with cyanide. So he's eaten from an apple which is contaminated with cyanide and died almost immediately. So the thing was, though, he was known to use cyanide. I think he was cleaning silverware or something along those lines. So he did have cyanide in the house, and it's possible that he had accidentally contaminated the apple while doing something else, and it was an accident, or having cyanide in the house, if he chose to take his own life. It's a pretty effective way of doing it. So all he had to do was contaminate the apple and bite, and he was done. So I think they did. I think the coronial inquest did end up calling it a suicide.
Right. One interesting I read on the subject of Alan Turing is that because their argument was this probably caused more of a dysphoria, a body dysphoria, for him. And there was this interesting interpretation that he kind of tried to kind of assume the role of Snow White and took a bite out of the apple that killed him.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I've never heard that. Okay.
It's an interesting way to interpret what happened, but it kind of plays into the whole, attack on his own masculinity, I think, and kind of feminizing him.
A number of sources I've heard, because he's really a war hero. A lot of people don't realize we owe so much to Alan Turing in terms of his theoretical advancement and practical advancement of computing, as well as cracking the Enigma machine and so forth. So there's a lot there that everyone owes that to Alan Turing. But a number of sources have said that had he revealed his war service, his penalty would have been much less when he went to court. But he kept quiet about it because it was all classified. But that was, I mentioned the post-World War II societies. If someone was a war hero and they ended up in front of the courts, they got a significantly reduced penalty because of that. So there's almost a thank you for their war service. So, and if he'd somehow managed to get that across, he probably might have got a much lesser penalty, but he didn't, kept quiet, and was punished by the courts. So,
all right.
The rest is history.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Yeah, but back to circumcision was trending. People weighed in on the subject. We wanted this kind of conversation keep on going so we can bring more light to the issue, right?
Absolutely.
But I'm just glad that it turned out the way it did. I think the hypocrites exposed themselves as hypocrites, and the people that spoke out against it got their attention was had, and they reacted accordingly. So it's getting out there.
Yeah, exactly. Even getting people to think about it, stop and think about it, and just rather than just assuming, mindlessly assuming this is what you have to do because that's what everybody does in society, actually getting people to stop and think even for a moment, I think is probably a big thing. So any idea, was it because of, Ben Shapiro and stuff that caused it, or was there something else that caused it to start trending? Or
I wish I can have a good grasp on what it is that actually started the thing, but if I were to make a guess, it was the Andrew Sullivan tweet, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, right. The Andrew Sullivan, are you willing to talk about infant male genital mutilation as much as you're talking about the transgender surgeries? Let me see if I can find Andrew Sullivan's. I don't know a terrible lot about him, but I knew who he was. He's a online writer on Substack or something like that. I genuinely don't know too much about him. Let's see.
By the way, the A Voice for Men official policy, you can find on A Voice for Men. Bern and I are both involved with A Voice for Men, and it rejects, obviously, routine infant circumcision and gender reassignment of children.
Right.
I put it and they're into one policy document. So that's how close we see them together.
Yeah. Okay. Here we are. I got it. Yeah. Here's this tweet from August 16th. I wonder how many people who oppose child sex changes also oppose circumcision. Similar principle of the bodily integrity of children, especially their sex organs. So yeah, perfect
that's
tweet, right?
Exactly. That's right. Being able to get it in that sort of limited space, I think he's done really well. Yeah, that is the key argument right there. Aside from, yes, we can talk about the damage it does and all that stuff. In the end, it's about bodily integrity and that it's not okay to remove healthy tissue from children who cannot consent.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Like, you get some arguments sometimes that children can't consent. So we have to do it for them. That's an argument I sometimes hear.
That's the parental argument again. And it is true that sometimes parents have to make that choice in relation to medical procedures, but even informed proponents of circumcision don't claim this is a necessary medical procedure. It's not correcting an immediate medical problem.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. So in my case, at least, Matt Walsh's hypocrisy sort of kickstarted things off I wish I was the one that kickstarted this discussion, but I'm not that conceited. So, but speaking on Matt Walsh, we've got some feedback from Peter Wright here. He's I just love that he's listening. He's always throwing us a bone, as it were. He says, I'd like to hear a discussion of Matt Walsh and his allying with radical feminists on the transgender topic. What do you make of it?
Do you have some thoughts on that?
I think Matt Walsh is trying to play white knight. He's really trying to reach out to the radical feminists, and see, it's like with a pretext of trying to fight this transgender craze and such, right? To me, it just sounds like slay queen feminists. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. Feminism is really, there's a lot of hypocrisy in there, and one area we see hypocrisy is that on the one hand, it's all about the strong women don't need no man, and then they're really quite happy when the white knights step in and save them as well. So it's you can't have it both ways.
Exactly. Yeah. And one thing I have to kind of critique some people who make certain arguments on behalf of men, actually, that they can't help being self-sacrificial, and that they can't help, we do this for you, that's one thing I want to object to, because here's my response. Who are you going to convince? Feminists? They're going to keep on hating men anyway, right? Yes, so why appeal to the fact that, men do this for you guys, So I think it's a very futile way to convince feminists to drop the act and support men, because they're not going to, and they're not going to earn our respect by us being on our knees and dying.
That's right, exactly. I mean, if you look at the White Feather campaign in World War I, it's an interesting one that feminists have tried to claim also that white feathers were rare. There's primary evidence to show that they were not rare. If you look, there are many newspaper archives around the world. When I've looked at British newspaper archives, it was last time, probably a couple of years ago, but unfortunately it was a paid service to actually search them, although I did pay for some searches. The Australian, but if anyone's interested, the equivalent Australian newspaper archives are completely free, and you can look in there. And they talk during the World Wars, they're still talking about a lot of the same issues and a lot of the same events. And you find many comments about white feathers during World War I. And notably, a lot of the comments are written or a lot of the newspaper articles are written in a manner that makes it clear that everybody understands what white feathers are. So they're not explaining them, because their journalists know, their audience already knows what the white feathers are and what's going on. And they just talk about them. For example, one I remember seeing was a priest who was actually standing on the pulpit, and he was actually criticizing women for shaming men in this manner. This is during World War I, he was doing this. And it was pretty clear that if you got the priest there doing this, his parishioners know all about this. The journalist who's writing it knows, his audience knows all about this. This was something that was very, very common. Yeah. And it was very much about, and you had these women, some of which, by the way, who were suffragettes, who were doing this as well. Not all of them, but some of them were suffragettes. And they were, so that in the one hand, you've got the women who are arguing, say, for universal female franchise. On the other hand, they're shaming men into not going off and fighting in a terrible and in many ways pointless war.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. But back to Matt Walsh trying to kind of, and it's not just Matt Walsh, right? It's people like Tucker Carlson, and it's just all these people trying to buddy up with the feminists just to own the trans people. They
won't thank you.
Yeah. Nope.
Yeah.
They won't.
It's interesting. This is something I guess we've had a lot more experience with than a lot of these people have dealing with feminism. I remember a few years ago, Jordan Peterson. There was some sort of debate going on. And he basically told his own followers to sort of back off a little bit. And what you'll find is that the feminists will just see blind and they'll just go for it. They will not thank you for that. And that's what they did. And we could have told him, he was a bit shocked, I think, just from the public statements he made. He was a bit shocked at what happened, but we all knew what was going to happen because we've been dealing with it for so long.
Exactly, right. And, speaking of Peterson, let's, one other person that's really guilty of this whole kind of reaching out to feminist thing is his daughter, Michaela.
Right.
She's had Kara Dansky on her show and retweets Kara Dansky all the time. And she's a big, she says two things, transgenderism is a men's rights movement, therefore it is evil. And the second thing she says is that men need to step up against the transgender craze.
So there's a couple of good points. First of all, if anything, the transgender movement came out of feminism because it's feminism that argued that gender was a social construct, and it's pretty much the next logical step to go, well, if gender is a social construct, I can just change it anytime I want. And so that argument is that it's interesting how once things turn bad for them, they immediately start to claim it was us doing it. Yeah, there's a reason I call them the marketing department.
Yeah. I just sent you a link by the New American about radical feminists demand chivalry, wants men to help fight transgenderism.
Right.
Peter Wright.
And that's the second point.
Yeah, Peter Wright wanted us to talk about this one, and we got the time. So
absolutely, and that's the second one. Telling men to step up. Okay, so if you really believe in gender equality, and when we talk about gender equality, there's a lot of debates about what that means. But I talk about the legal and social equality of men and women. So regardless of whatever else may be going on, the law should treat men and women the same. And having so we have the social equality and we have legal equality, but I've said this: if a country is threatened, okay, I believe that it is if it's deemed necessary for people to stand up, protect the country, then that right has to be borne by all able-bodied adults, not men and women. I know we've talked about this a little bit, but if it is necessary to step up and protect the society in some way, it's men and women that have to do that, not men, because we see this a lot from the feminists. They say men need to step up. Why should men step up? If there's a real threat, all able-bodied adults need to step up.
Right. Yeah. And I'm going to kind of go into that defense subject. That's why I think something like the Second Amendment is so great in the United States, because arming your citizens it's about actually voluntarily stepping up to defend both yourself, your community, your country, all things that kind of flow into the other, right? So I like the slogan that the Second Amendment is America's original homeland security. In a way, that's true, actually, because we're taking control of our own country's defense. So it's actually a bit of a wonder to me why a draft even really exists, thought experiment wise. I know the arguments for having a draft and everything like that. I'm not fond of it because I'm not for conscription exactly, but I like the idea of
libertarian. So yeah, it makes sense as a libertarian. It makes sense that that's right. That you wouldn't want the state to have that right to draft people.
Exactly, right. But, the draft seems very symptomatic of how out of touch the citizenry are with the actual affairs of the country, I think. One big thing that I'm kind of really critical of was, I think this was during the FDR era. I think I could be completely wrong. I'm not, the history isn't exactly a strong suit of mine, but there was this idea of the essential freedoms, I think it were. Yeah. I'm
a bit of a history geek, but probably American history probably isn't my strongest area. There's well, no, it isn't my strongest area. I have a decent working knowledge of probably major themes in American history, but like I could probably have a discussion about the New Deal or something. But yeah, I'm not. Yeah, I'm interested. I'm not familiar with that.
Well, here we go. The four freedoms. Yeah, and it was an FDR era thing. It was something that came from some address called, well, the Four Freedoms speech, and it's a 1941 State of the Union. The four freedoms are freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. Now, here's the thing. It's like, these are things, in theory, I don't actually have anything against, right? But here's the thing. Like, I think people take these as something that is guaranteed by the government, I think. And so my personal criticism is that these things kind of keep people, the citizenry, kind of detached from actually taking responsibility to attain these very things.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Yes. I see where you're coming from. So freedom from want, if you took it as he's made that a government responsibility, then that would be a social security system. I suppose you could take an alternative view that the society is meant to be so prosperous that nobody goes without.
Right.
I'm not sure in which sense he meant that, but yeah, I imagine a lot of people would see it as interpreted as being basically an endorsement of a strong social security system.
Exactly right. Yeah, my nitpick is just that I think these are things that people think we're entitled to, instead of using our own arms to kind of be sure that these aren't taken away from us.
Yes.
That's my interpretation of this whole thing.
Yeah, I've also heard an argument in relation to the Second Amendment that the government should be a little bit afraid of the citizenry. I think is the argument. Yes,
right.
Rather than the other way around.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. So did you want to actually read through the article at all about transgenderism and kind of pick it apart a bit? Well, it's not the article itself that needs picking apart. It's the article is already picking apart Karadansky, but you can read through some of it maybe.
Yeah. Which article was that? Sorry, the
the
one you just sent me. Sorry.
Yeah.
The one you just sent me. Yes.
Yeah.
I may have just lost that.
Well, I can start reading it off, So,
yes, thanks.
All right, so she dismisses the idea of transitioning, but that hasn't stopped radical feminist Karadansky from transitioning into a traditionalist for a moment and demanding that men stand up for women and denounce the transgender movement, as PJ Media puts it. Call it situational chivalry.
Yeah. And this actually speaks to, I found it again, thanks. So this actually speaks to a very common phenomenon too, which I was getting to a little bit before, alluding to, where the feminists actually end up lining up with traditionalists insofar as they both seem to expect for men to step up and surrender their life for the community and so forth. So even though these two groups are often seen to be in opposition, there are areas where they actually seem to agree with one another, and that might even be intersect. Yeah, and it might even be becoming. That's right. It might be becoming more prominent now, actually, with transgenderism on the rise. We have people on the conservative side and also the feminists also both coming out against transgenderism.
Exactly. All right, so a little bit more. As PJ Media reports, Karadansky, a feminist lawyer and spokeswoman for Women's Liberation Front, spoke against the so-called Equality Act at the Heritage Foundation on Monday, denouncing the transgender and gender identity movement as anti-women and anti-lesbian in particular. Her remarks echoed the London Pride March sign declaring that trans activism erases lesbians. This is a men's rights movement, Kandansky declared, calling for men to stand up for women and denounce the transgender movement, the site continued. The Heritage Foundation was hosting a panel discussion titled The Inequality of the Equality Act, Concerns from the Left.
So historically, when I say historically, I'm talking about, I guess, over the last few decades, there were far more, about 3/4 of the people who transitioned were male to female, okay? So that was over the last few decades. In the last 5 years, this has actually flipped. And there are now more girls transitioning to be boys than the other way around.
Okay.
I think it's around about the same, actually. So it's about 75%. So it's actually really interesting that they talk about this as being an attack on lesbianism and so forth. They're talking about, of course, the men who transition to be women end up in could call it lesbian spaces where and you've got the young lesbians under pressure to have sex with trans women, even though they have penises and so forth. And but in actual fact, it's only about 1/4 of the people who are transitioning are male to female. The majority of them are young women who are transitioning towards being male. So, which I think is interesting too. As a little bit of an aside, we live in a society, and this is something we talk about a lot, where we're taught how great it is to be, everyone says how great it is to be male and you're on top, and the feminists, I've heard feminists say being male is like living life on easy and so forth. I think I can probably offer some counter arguments to that. I think this might be why we're seeing so many young women do this. So they think it's easier being male. I hate to tell them this, but they're in for a bit of a surprise. If they really start to pass as male, then they will discover that nobody cares, quite frankly, and that's to a large degree. Neither men nor women will care very much about what happens to men individually. Yeah. By the way, on the topic of that, as I'm sort of probably branching off a little bit, Nora Vincent died last month.
Yeah. She was the one that decided to live as a man for a period and concluded that, this kind of sucks, and went into a depression rehab, didn't she? Exactly,
that's right. So Nora Vincent was herself a lesbian woman, and she decided to live as a man originally for 18 months. In the end, she only did this for 8 months, although I think she got enough data, and she ended up writing a book about it. But as you say, not long after she actually had a friend who was an expert makeup artist, and the friend basically showed her how to prepare makeup for herself, which allowed her to pass as a male. She famously joined a bowling alley. I guess that's maybe a stereotypically male thing to do. So she joined bowling league. She joined a bowling league, right? Mm-hmm. She went out with lots of women, portraying herself as a heterosexual man. This is over a period of 8 months. As you say, when she decided to end the experiment and she transitioned back, or she went back to living as a woman, she actually checked herself into a mental health facility not long afterwards, basically had a breakdown. Mm. But she wrote a book. So she'd said that she'd originally intended to basically live as a man, then write a book about how great it is to be a man. Instead, she ended up writing a book about how challenging it is to live as a man.
Exactly. Yeah.
So Nora Vincent, I really applaud her honesty for doing what she did, for being honest. Even though it went really against her preconceived notions about what she thought she'd find, she told the truth.
Yeah, that's absolutely fair. Not to make light of this thing, but why do people think that bowling is such a male thing? It's like it's one of the more inclusive. Like my mom was telling me the other day that back in her day she bowled a lot. So
you're right. Actually, you're right. It does seem to be. I don't know if it's episodes of the Flintstones that we used to see when growing up that teaches us all that bowling is a stereotypically male thing. Mm-hmm. I used to work in a bowling alley when I was a student at university, and I was never a very good bowler. But but I do remember the leagues, and yeah, you're right. There were maybe more men, but there were plenty of women in the leagues too, actually.
Oh yeah, sure. Like
absolutely.
Yeah, once a month or so, my wife and I try to go bowling together, and
okay,
yeah,
good.
I think we're getting better. I mean, I saved some. Let me see if I can get some screenshots of how well I did. It's a good bowling alley. Some of the food, because there's some food you can buy. Get yourself some dinner. And they're using robots now to deliver the food to each lane. Right? Yeah. And it's really good. It's like it has like a cat face on it, so it has like this really friendly kind of voice that telling people to excuse me, I'm coming through, that kind of thing. It's a really I really love seeing the robots. Okay, here it is. Probably the best I've gotten is like a 147, I guess.
It's pretty good, actually.
Yeah, sure. Sometimes I suck, but that, yeah.
It's certainly, I think, better than anything. I think maybe I pushed 100 or something, but that was never very good.
I'm trying to get better at it. It's like we both are, but about the robot, like it was going through, and it was I overheard these two girls saying that, oh, that robot reminds me of a cat, even though it's like clearly, obviously trying to be like a cat.
Yes, be a cat.
I don't know. I just can't understand.
Reminiscent of a cat. Yes. Please get a photo of it. Actually, I'd like to see that.
I got a video of it. I put it on my Instagram, so I'll show it to you at some point. So
that'd be great. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. How do we get here from all this subject?
Nora Vincent in a bowling league. Yeah. So it was interesting actually that she does talk about in the book things like male camaraderie and so forth in the bowling league. One of the things she said that surprised her was that all the men helped her. And thinking she's a man, all the men showed her bowling techniques. She thought that her perception of male society, culture, as it were, male interactions, was that the men would always be trying to compete and put each other down, and so they would obviously just try to nail this or just destroy this poor bowler, right? It wasn't very good. But in actual fact, I think certainly as we would see naturally in male interactions, that that yes, they're interested in the competition, but the competition has to be worth something, right?
Oh yeah.
You want the other guy to get better, so that you've got some challenge. Okay, there's no challenge, there's no honor in destroying someone who doesn't know how to bowl. Okay, you want them to get better, right? So that you can have a challenge in a good game, and that's how it will work. And even if you win or you lose, it's the fun of the challenge and the fact that maybe you learned something, maybe you got a little bit better, like you're saying with yourself trying to improve your own game. So. But she was really surprised at all the support she got and how people took the time to show her techniques and so forth and improve her in her team, improve her game.
Right.
So anyway, So it was interesting that she was surprised with it.
Yeah, that was the big subject of my very first ICMI speech, by the way, the idea of competition. It's not about being predatory. It's about actually using this competition so that either side actually gets better through that rivalry. You're constant, and you're competing against what you used to be, what you presently are, and you're still competing with other people that are doing the same. So that was the entire premise of that speech, and I think competition is sorely misunderstood, and I think men are misunderstood by virtue of this too.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and it's probably something we should be as men should be talking about a lot more. I think most of us probably innately understand this and how this works, but maybe if Nora's a typical example, maybe a lot of women don't understand how intra-male competition works, and maybe it is something like with your speech we need to be talking about a lot more. That's a really interesting point. I think that might be something I might start to mention more too, actually.
Well, yeah.
It's an interesting thing, isn't it? I just see it as, yes, we're competing, but at the same time, that the fun is in the competition. And as you say, we're both improving as a result of that competition.
Sure, right. Like, I think a lot of people are trying to be PC and saying that this is not a competition. This is about cooperation. And I'm talking about any given kind of vocation, any kind of field. And, you know, this was a slogan that was brought up a lot during my time playing in bands in Florida, right, back in my college days. They're saying that, you know, bands aren't supposed to compete with each other. We're supposed to build each other up, which I think is a very bullshitty thing, because, you know, we're trying to make better music. We're trying to have better performances. We're trying to compete with one another and what we used to be. And why this isn't a brilliant thing, you know, they just don't get it, you know? Yeah.
The two aren't mutually exclusive, really, are they? You are, in a sense, there is a form of cooperation going on by virtue of the two of you competing within sort of, I guess, agreed rules. And then for the advancement of everyone. I think you can see a good example in certain sports, even say running, for example, where decade on decade, yes, there have been improvements in techniques and there have been improvements in nutrition and so forth. But at the same time, human beings keep advancing and achieving, say, times in running events that people previously thought were impossible or that were completely out of reach. But incrementally, people, if runner A has achieved a time that nobody else has achieved, and time again, you'll see this in the historical record when you look at sports events, there might be a runner, like the 4-minute mile is a classic one. A lot of people, that was a big one in distance running and medium distance running. But once somebody had achieved the 4-minute mile, a whole bunch of other people did it and did a lot better within a fairly relatively short period of time. And that's something you see actually a lot in these events, that once somebody achieves some target, lots of other people do it. So it's interesting. Why didn't they do it before? It's because they're actually competing and they're aiming for what that person did to beat that individual. And I think this is something I've looked at sporting data quite a bit. And this is, to some extent, and this is something you do see, that once somebody makes a certain point, other people get past that point as well.
Exactly.
Even though previously a lot of people seem to be struggling with it. So why are they struggling anymore? It's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, sure. I mean, you know, it's about that journey, isn't it? You know, it's that kind of building yourself up and always maybe asymptotically reaching that goal, I suppose. You know, maybe you do reach first sometimes, maybe you do win, but it's that striving that's the real brilliant thing.
Yeah. And certainly there's a mental aspect to it all.
Yeah. You know, it's funny that we brought up this idea of competition. I just got done watching a classic popular Japanese anime called Slam Dunk. Yeah, and it's about basketball, right?
Okay.
Yeah, and see, what struck me is that this was the manga and anime that made basketball completely explode in Japan in popularity.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. Like it was almost either unpopular or even close to taboo for some reason I can't figure out. But you know, that was before. But after this series took off, basketball became this huge thing. And I just got done watching the anime. It's not the whole story because they cut it off at some point for some reason. But
when does it date from? When does it date from, roughly?
Let's see. Let me take a quick look. Sorry, I'm trying to look at Slam Dunk, but it took me to the actual basketball act. Just a moment. We're never prepared for any of this kind of stuff. We're doing this stuff on the fly, folks.
Exactly. That's right. We do. Yeah. That's right.
Okay. So the manga was from 1990 to 96.
Okay.
Yeah. Right.
Okay. So basketball is still reasonably popular in Japan? I'd
like to think so. It's probably not as popular as, say, baseball. I think baseball is kind of like the national sport there. I don't really know what's the hierarchy of which is more popular. I know soccer is popular there, basketball, and but definitely baseball. So yeah, it's about this guy. He's really kind of down on his luck, slacker guy, and he reaches his 50th rejection by a girl, right? And so he starts off trying to impress this one girl by joining the basketball team because she's big into basketball, and in the school, her older brother's the captain and everything like that, right? So he originally gets into basketball just to impress her, right? But as the series progresses, he becomes more competitive and ends up loving the sport for itself and actually getting better and better and better and kicking ass. So I know it's a really, really good story. It's really funny too. That's the best thing about Japanese shows, is that they balance good amount of humor with seriousness.
He actually discovered that he loved basketball.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, nice.
Right, yeah. So I highly recommend people check this out. Really, as like a men's, men's story. Never mind the fact that that the main character's kind of got the hots, probably too much for his own good for this one girl. But aside from that, it's no show is perfect. But I want people to check out Slam Dunk. It's really, really good, even if you're not into basketball.
Yeah. Yes.
Right. Yeah.
Yes. No, very good. Yeah.
Yeah. This is one thing I saw on Twitter from an account called Dudes Posting Your W's. It's a screenshot of a guy saying, "I'm trying to fuck a girl that works at a bakery. So I told her that I liked baking, and I tried to make my own sourdough. And now I have a new hobby, and I don't really feel like seeing her later today."
I saw you post that actually in one of our internal groups. Now I've seen Slam Dunk. I get the context more, right? Yes.
Yeah, I said that this is almost like the plot of Slam Dunk, only with baking sourdough bread.
Yeah. So,
right. Like
this is great. He's discovered he loves baking. That's fabulous.
Yeah. Like, I can just see it now. Like, he's have to compete with other bakers in the same kitchen or something like that. And they have this intense rivalry with the guy who gets all the girls, but he's down on his luck. This could go everywhere. Yeah. All right. So, is there anything else we want to kind of talk about? We're almost at the 1.5 hour mark.
Exactly, that's right. Yeah, and I think we've done quite well, actually. It's probably a fairly natural point to finish. So this is episode 4. Mm-hmm. Yes, I think we're doing quite well. Approximately every 2 weeks, except when I had one extra week where I was still getting over COVID a little bit.
Right. One guy on Twitter said that, so you moved the goalpost then. So every time that happens, every time that happens, we have to make the announcement, we're moving the goalpost.
That's brilliant.
Yeah. Right. Hopefully,
that's one of those things you go, oh man, I wish I'd thought of that.
Yeah, we have. We'll try not to move the goalpost so many times, but
too often
things happen. So
that's right, exactly. That's right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Vernon. As usual, this has been fun, and yes, completely unscripted, and we just pick up topics that are topical. So, as well as A Voice for Men, we have Wiki for Men. This is something that we've been writing for about 10 years, and if I'm sort of stuck for something, I sometimes hit random page on Wiki for Men and see what it comes up, because there's all sorts of topics on there that are interesting to look at. Yeah,
sure. This week just turned out to be a very rich week for subjects. So
exactly, that's right. Yes, it did indeed. Well, thanks very much, Vern. 2 weeks.
Yeah, 2 weeks. All right.
And
see you guys later.
Try not to move the goalpost. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Bye.